July 30th, 1945, 0014 hours, Philippine Sea. The night was velvet black and heavy with heat, a sky salted with hard white stars, and a horizon that didn't so much exist as insinuate itself between air and water. Below those stars, the heavy cruiser USS Indianapolis drove east at 26 knots, a knife of steel and habit. She had made her delivery, components for a weapon nobody aboard was allowed to name, and now she was alone, unescorted, in an ocean that had learned to bite. Seaman First Class Daniel Harper, 23, Texas Gulf Coast born, good with knots and bad at cards, stood along the lifeline on the port side, trying to siphon a cooler thread of air out of the night. Sweat pasted his shirt to his spine. Somewhere aft a bosun's whistle trilled, quick and sharp. Somewhere forward the invisible sea boomed with their bow wave. He was thinking of home, tar-smelled jetties, the bounce of mullet in a cast net, his mother's soap that always carried a ghost of lye. At 0014 the ship lurched as if a giant hand had flicked her hull. The first torpedo from Japanese submarine Hwan 58 hit starboard bow and tore steel like bread. The second struck amidships. All at once the ship's deep noises, the steady machinery heartbeat men learned to ignore, were torn to clanging, screaming counterpoints. Ruptured fuel spraying into fire, steam lines venting, water roaring where no water should be. The world went tilted. The alarm bellowed, "Abandon ship!" Abandon ship. Harper's knees hit steel. He flung arms for balance and came up running, instinct finding its path before orders arrived. The deck had a slick to it now, oil misting from the air intakes, small fires snapping at paint. He grabbed a Kapok life jacket from a rack and wrenched the straps tight, fingers clumsy, then snatched for a knife he kept tucked in his waistband. The cruiser shuddered again, deeper this time, and the deck went from slanted to treacherous. He heard men shouting station names, heard prayers in Missouri and Maine accents, heard the boom of compartment ceiling and the last, failing thuds of bulkheads trying to hold back the Pacific. 12 minutes is forever, and not enough when a ship decides to go. The Indianapolis heeled hard to starboard, her bow settling. Harper took one last glance at the looming superstructure, the ladders and rails and antennas that had been his map, and saw them already wrong, already a picture sliding off a wall. He climbed the rail, tasted oil, and leapt. The water hit like a fist. He plunged down and down, the sea colder than it had any right to be in that heat, then popped to the surface, coughing fuel. Noise was everywhere, the frying pan hiss of burning slicks, men yelling for rafts, the bowels deep iron groan of a heavy cruiser dying. A girder scythed past close enough to see its rivet heads. He frog-kicked hard away from the spewing flame patches, eyes burning, mouth blistering with petroleum. The ship was already slanting into a silhouette that wasn't a ship anymore. She rolled, showed her belly, and slid under in a slurp of bubbles and forced air that pulled at him like a grasping child. Then came the strangest quiet he'd ever known, a huge hush that wasn't silence so much as shock. Around him, heads, arms, the pale shine of faces, Kapok jackets buoying men in a peppering of white over the black. Here and there, rafts, cargo nets, hatch covers, pallets, anything that floated had value, and men clung to value with animal hands. "Over here! Over here! Anyone seen Mac?" "God, God." Harper coughed again and vomited diesel bitter water. He pawed at his mouth, spat thick strings that tasted like a mechanic's shop, and blinked through sting. The stars were the same above. The world below felt changed forever. They gathered themselves into knots because that's what people do in dark water. Some linked arms, some looped wrists with a length of line. The air was still, suffocating. Sweat gathered on brows even as bodies chilled. From somewhere to his right, Harper heard an officer's voice, hoarse but steady, lay out the only plan there was. Stay together, don't waste energy, Don't drink the sea. Share what you've got. Dawn came like a bruised yellow bruise along the rim of the world. The first daylight revealed the breadth of it, men scattered by the current into clusters, eyes raw, lips already swelling. The sun rose an arm's length and hit with a kind of violence of its own. Life jackets creaked with the sinewed movement of men who'd found a way to keep moving, just enough to resemble stillness. Then, sometime after the second hour of morning, Harper saw it. A triangular fin, slicing between bodies at a distance, so neat and certain it looked like a drawing. Another further off. The ocean has 1,000 shadows. Your mind will draw predators where there are none. But this wasn't imagination. The fin cut a tidy V, then arced down in a lazy S. "Sharks," someone said, flat, as if announcing weather. The first man went under so fast, Harper didn't see the start of it. There was a splash, and then a scream that ripped itself in two, and a red flower exploded into the glare. Men kicked and slapped, went tight with panic that steals air faster than fear. Another dorsal swept close and nudged a pair of legs, testing a boundary. Even the sharks seemed to understand. Humans didn't taste like seal or tuna, but protein is protein, and the sea keeps books. "Keep still," the officer's voice again, broken and bossy. "Hit 'em if they bump you. Don't thrash." Easy orders, hard to obey when a shape big as a telephone pole passes under your feet and those feet know their meat. Harper pulled his knees higher, tucked into the kapok bowels a knot. He watched a shark roll a little to put eye to man, a glance so appraising it felt like insult. The animal swung away, indifferent. 10 beats later, a different fin took a man who had drifted alone, his life jacket sopping loose. The ocean closed its mouth. The sun burned higher. Time lost texture. The men in Harper's group traded names because names make a circle feel like a raft. The officer was Ensign Benitez from California. The radio man was Ronnie Hale. Tennessee cadences worn thin by salt. There was a machinist named Orr who swore each hour he would not drink the sea and meant it until the hour turned. Harper kept his mouth dry with shallow breaths and thought about water anyway. By noon, the sun was a blade, and skin was parchment. Heat bounced like a second sky from the sea. Some men wrapped shirts over their heads, some had nothing to wrap, and watched their shoulders go from burnt to blistered to weeping, lips split, eyes scummed. The sharks came and went like punctuation marks, commas for long cruise-bys, exclamation points when a man separated from the group to urinate or vomit or just drifted. Oceanic white tips, someone said, the kind that owns open water. A tiger now and then, bigger, with the doorstep-toothed jaw. No one needed identification to feel the verdict in their marrow. At dusk, the sea turned copper and purple. The breeze, such as it was, died to nothing. The sky dressed itself in a million pinholes. Here and there, men sang something off-key and broken to keep the dark from repeating thoughts. The sharks' fins were shadows now, closer to rumor than fact, but their bodies pushed a presence through water that hands could feel. Harper slept in slivers, 10 seconds at a time. Dreams came full of wrong tastes and the tug of unseen lines. He woke to his own jaw clamped so hard on his tongue he'd made blood coppery and strange. The night stretched in all directions. They saw no ships, no planes, only the absolute geometry of ocean and the way a group of men can make a kind of island when they don't let go. July 30th, 1945, late night into July 31st, Philippine Sea. The second night was a thief. It stole bearings, and with them it stole patience. Men in Harper's cluster murmured to themselves and to God and to people hundreds of miles inland who couldn't hear but might throw a rope anyway, because surely ropes can be thrown as far as prayers. The sea slapped their chins and crept into mouths. The stars stayed implacably indifferent. Before dawn, someone near Harper started to quietly cry. It wasn't a weeping exactly, it was the sound human throats make when there's more inside than there's room for. Ensign Benitez reached across, put 2 fingers on the man's shoulder, and tapped twice in a rhythm that said, "You're here, and so am I." That small pressure drew a map back into the world. Dawn came hungry. The heat built quickly, like an argument that decides to escalate. The sun rose and the ocean turned into a mirror designed to work you over from both sides. By 9, the horizon boiled with glare. The kapok jackets that had felt like salvation at midnight were a torture now, chafing skin raw under arms and across bellies. Faces puffed, tongues thickened, growing too big for mouths that had only salt to cradle them. Sharks don't clock in and out. They arrive in patterns that look like intention, but are only simple algorithms of hunger, currents, opportunity. The oceanic whitetips returned in a school of shadows, broad pectorals barely under the film of water, dorsal fins tracing cursive at the edges of the group. The rules went around again, fists if bumped, elbows lowered, no thrashing. And then the rules learned their limit, fear. One man, young enough to still have a boy's cheeks under the stubble, saw a fin carved directly past his thighs and simply lost the space between thought and motion. He kicked hard. The shark, startled, rolled, flashed pale, disappeared, then returned like a correction. A quick boil, a churn, a slick. The group closed ranks without speaking, in the way people do when they are refusing to do math. Harper breathed through his nose, slow as he could. His head ached like a struck bell. He thought of the bay at home and how his father always told him not to swim where fish work had been done. "Blood brings things you can't bargain with," the old man had said, cigarette bobbing in his lips. He thought of that while he counted breaths. He didn't let himself count time. Around midday a quarrel sparked. 2 men at the edge of the circle snapping over nothing, the way everything gets sharp when your skin is already flayed. Ensign Benitez cut it with a single disgusting imperative. "Boys, save it. Save it for a hamburger. When you get one, you can fight over pickles." Not now, it was so stupid and kind, it landed. Laughter coughed up, broke into coughing, and then into breathing again. The dead drifted among them. That was unavoidable, and it was its own problem. Sharks took interest where motion stilled, but when the current pushed a body back into the circle, hands found the dead the way they'd found the living, and moved them gently away. No keening, no right. Just a recognition. We can't keep you and keep ourselves. By afternoon, madness began to sketch its first lines. A machinist's mate named Orr, who'd sworn each hour he would not drink the sea, muttered now that he could smell coffee. "Galley's open," he said, cheerful and gone. "Mess call." He pivoted in his kapok, clawing at straps. Harper reached for him. Orr smiled as if slapped from a dream and said, "They'll be mad if I'm late," and shoved hard away from the circle. He made 15 kicks before a shadow rose like a sentence. The water hammered. When it cleared, there was nothing where Orr had been. Harper swallowed around his heart. It is hard work not to drink the sea when it is the only thing in your mouth. Lips split wider, tongues stuck to teeth. Some men took the smallest swallows, lies they told their better sense, just enough to wet the mouth, and within an hour they were raving. One of them saw a fountain, a white one like outside a courthouse in Mobile. Another promised cold Coca-Cola in green glass, sweating on a stoop if he could only unlatch the yard gate. Yet another saw his mother, perpetually 30, and sunlit on a porch that never was. They swam toward her, and toward the courthouse, and toward the drink that could not exist here. The sharks understood none of it. The sharks understood motion. As evening drew down again, a breeze flirted in and then left. The sky painted itself with the same indifference as before. Men huddled close, the circle tightening reflexively, the way cold bodies seek other bodies. Harper's shoulders blazed even as he shivered. He realized he was counting again without meaning to, 4 breaths to a swallow, 5 swallows to a minute, minutes that had nothing inside them but a determination to stand still. "I've got you, Tex," Ronnie Hale said, a hand finding Harper's sleeve. His voice was a rasp that used to be a drawl. "Keep your eyes on that star there, the bright mean one. Make it your job." "My job?" Harper croaked. "Yeah, somebody's got to hold it up. Take turns." He held the star. It was idiotic, and it worked for 10 minutes. 10 minutes is half a lifetime in a hot ocean that smells of oil and has teeth. Night brought a new quiet, the kind that feels like eavesdropping on your own heartbeat. Somewhere out in the black, a whale exhaled once, the softest, saddest cough of a giant. It was so out of scale with their situation, it made Harper's eyes sting. He had not cried since the ship slid under. He chose not to cry now. He told himself that was a choice he still controlled. And a man is a stack of those that you don't let go of, even when so much else is gone. The stars burned on. He fell into a series of dreams where he was already saved and walked through the ship's passageways, dripping, looking for dry socks, hearing a galley clatter up honest food. Each time he woke, the smell of diesel slapped him, and the sea licked his chin, and he started the count again. August 1st, 1945. The sun came up like punishment. They had been in the water a day and a half, maybe 2. Time had unhooked itself from hands and necks and hung in the sky like something you couldn't reach. The kapok jackets had absorbed enough fuel and seawater to add stink to weight. The circles of men were thinner now, and the water around them carried little clues that multiplied nausea. A floating boot with no foot, a line of oranges from some ruptured storeroom that had become fuel-bitter sponges, a mess kit lid reflecting sun like a signal that meant nothing to any rescue. Late morning, an argument started, not mad this time, just cracked, about whether to try to swim to a horizon that had never moved. The current had been drifting them like a sleepwalking crowd. The idea of choosing a direction tasted like a feast. Ensign Benitez said no, with what authority a junior officer can wield on an ocean that does not rank people. You break the circle, you lose fingers, then you lose hands, then you're gone. He didn't say sharks. He didn't have to. The white tips returned. Their movement had gained a lazy confidence. Why not? There was meat to be had, and no sensible competition. 2 of them slid into the inside edge of the group and bumped knees. Fists thudded at snouts. One shark rolled languidly to eye a pair of clustered torsos, decided against risk, and slouched away like a street-tough board with an unpaying mark. 30 minutes later, a big shape rose straight up under a man 3 body lengths away, took him in a gulp to the hips, thrashed, and left a red wreath that traveled outward in a ring too perfect to bear. "Don't look," Ronnie Hale said. Harper looked anyway. Human eyes are traitors. Around midday they saw a school of flying fish scatter like thrown coins. It was gorgeous and obscene. Those silver slivers hit skin in a patter, half jumping, half dying, and a few men grabbed and ate them raw with a ferocity that briefly made everyone animals, with secret relief. Protein is protein here too. The sharks glided through, unimpressed. They folded themselves into the water the way knives fold into pockets. Hallucinations sharpened. A boatswain's mate began a roll call of his high school baseball team, counting off names, accomplishment, errors. He apologized to a girl he'd been ugly to in junior year, then said he could smell hot dogs, and then laughed until he coughed a sound that wasn't laughter, and then he went quiet. Another man announced he was going below to get a wrench. He ducked under, gone smooth as if his body was a decision, then came back blowing brine and spitting, eyes furious. "You bar stewards locked it," he said, and then sobbed like a child, and then slept on the water like the dead sleep, the body gone slack enough to look done. In the afternoon the sun decided to hurt people differently. Skin bubbled, noses bled. A few men pushed their life jackets higher so the kapok rim pressed across their lips and shielded just enough of the face that the sun felt like less of an enemy. The smell of oil had sunk into everything, a metallic sweetness that killed appetite and invited vomit, which in turn invited thirst. Water, water everywhere. The rhyme from school had never sounded more like mockery. Harper's tongue had become a dry, inarticulate creature in his mouth, a useless tenant demanding release from a lease. "Plane," someone said, a word that jumped from mouth to mouth like a spark. Heads snapped. Any glint in the sky becomes a plan when you've been forgotten. They saw nothing but a smear of cloud and a trick of light, and were left with a fresh, raw absence. Harper fixed on work. Work is the rewiring you can do to a mind. He took inventory, his life jacket straps still holding, though one grommet had torn long, the knife at his hip still there because keeping a tool translates as keeping a future. The men's count, down 3 from dawn, the line, still looped between wrists in a weak square. He breathed, counted, adjusted, kept his legs tucked. As evening shaded in, the wind wrote tiny cursive in the water that felt like forgiveness. No rescuer, no ship's keel. Just a small relief that wasn't the sun. Someone began to tell a story, no one knew who, the voice just arrived, about a county fair in Kansas, the Ferris wheel, the scent of fried dough and summer dust, and girls whose perfume was drugstore lilac. The boys from salt places listened like people at church. Sharks brushed calves while the fair lights brightened. That night there were more dead than the circle could gently escort away. The sharks, practical in a way that doesn't flatter human ideas about mercy, gave the living a little berth when the easier feed came through. Harper watched one big fish shoulder his way between bodies like a man taking a seat in a crowded trolley, felt a tail slap his shin, and kept his hand still by grafting will onto muscle, the way a carpenter braces a weak spar, extra nail, extra attention. He dreamed of rain, woke hungry for it like a kiss. Found only stars. August 2nd, 1945, late morning. The sky was an aluminum plate, glaring and absolute. The ocean had a sawtooth chop that made every swallow of air a decision. Harper's group, torn down to a stubborn kernel of men, hung off their kapok jackets like laundry clips. Sometime mid-morning, a sound different from air and water put a thin electric wire through the day. "Listen," Benitez said, a whisper that burned his throat. "Listen." A throbbing. Not the insect buzz of blood in sun-baked ears, mechanical, cycling. A noise that meant intention and gasoline and human hands. "Plane, plane!" Men clawed at hope with their voices, arms lifted, kapok splashed. The thrum grew until it sat on the water like a blessing. A twin-engine patrol bomber, later they would learn a PV-1 Ventura, banked into the sun and came lower. It saw something first, an oil slick, a gleam of metal, and then it saw men. The big bird wagged its wings as if to shake a sleep from them all. Men wept dry, men laughed like barks, men called out names to be sure they still had them. Flares stuttered down, orange smeared on blue. Dye markers bloomed chemical green in lanes on the sea. A message can be a color. We see you. Hours compressed. The plane left and returned and left, radioing coordinates into a sky that finally carried words to other ears. A PBY Catalina, belly like a duck and courage to match, came later, piloted by a man who would land in rough water against orders because he couldn't stand the arithmetic. It skipped and bounced, and then settled and taxied like a stubborn tug to clusters of bodies, and took people aboard until its interior was crowded with fragile animals, and then tied more to its wings like ornaments on a stubborn Christmas. Harper watched all of it, as if it were happening 20 feet to the left of his life. He felt the abrasion of the straps on his raw underarms. He tasted blood from a split lip. He fixed on a simple thought. Not yet. You don't die today. "Hold up, Tex," Ronnie Hale said, fingers finding the line between them. "They're coming." "See that? That's somebody's job, and they're doing it." The Catalina bounced away to parley with another knot of survivors. A destroyer escort had been summoned. Soon lights would stab the night, ship's captain making a lighthouse of himself, in violation of doctrine, because doctrine had no place here. Soon. The word had weight and buoyancy. It floated among them. The sharks did not resign. The disturbance, engines, shouts, blood churned anew, stirred their interest. Oceanic whitetips slid back in under the surface film, circles tightening like a noose with each pass. One bumped Harper's shin with a blunt snout and slid on, indifferent for now. He flinched only inside his mind. He remembered a sentence he'd been fed as a boy, in a church he went to, as much for the shade, "Be not afraid." He tried it on. It didn't fit. It pinched at the ribs. He kept it anyway. Sometimes talismans work because you decide they do. "Look!" someone cried. A black triangle of hull low on the horizon, the destroyer escort, knifing toward the flares. Men surged. The circle fractured and reached. Hands scrabbled to claim 2 yards closer to the approaching answer. Sharks love edges. Chaos writes them quickly. The big fish moved through the churn like algorithmic certainty. There is no evil in it, and that is, it's evil. Harper felt the line slip from his wrist. He lunged to reclaim it. A forearm bumped his ear. Someone's heel hit his collarbone. He shoved back, keeping the drown panic tamped behind his chest bones. The destroyer grew, fast and slow, at once, slicing a white comma into the blue. "Rope!" a man shouted from somewhere left. A coil arced and slapped the chop. Hands went up and fingers failed, and another set succeeded, and the tug of human against human began to draw the Lucky aboard the Catalina's wing farther out, to a metal answer. Harper's shoulder burned with a hot rope of pain. He didn't know if it was a muscle tear or his skin giving up its last contracts with itself. He paddled 3 strokes and made 1 yard and paddled again, and the ocean took half back, exacting a tax. Something vast and certain slid under him, so close his thighs straddled it for a half-breath. The shark's skin rasped his inner knees like coarse sandpaper dragged over knuckles. He did not shout. He lifted his feet to his belly. It passed. He promised breath to his lungs later. A second shadow arrived from his blind side. The push against his hip was like a friend taking his place at a bar, casual and complete. Then brightness flared in the corner of his eye, white belly roll, jaw hinge, jaw closing, and the world telescoped to a ring of fire at his waist. The water erupted. Sound left. There was only pressure and ripping, and the unthinkable made tactile, the body reduced to an inventory of parts a predator had claims on. Ronnie Hale's voice was raw and immediate, right in his ear. "Hold him. Hold." And then the water boiled and arms became inadequate tools. Benitez drove an elbow into a snout and came away with blood that wasn't his. The shark, big, thick through the shoulders, a white tip with a brawler's posture, wrenched and rolled again. Harper's voice tore itself out of his throat in a short sound that punched holes in men's ribs. He saw the sky with a terrible clarity, saw the destroyer's shape, saw the Catalina's wake, saw a gannet fold its wings and spear the water a mile off, working its own arithmetic where none of this mattered. He thought of his mother's hands, greased with Crisco on a Sunday, pinching biscuits. He thought, crazily, that he'd done his job with the Star, and someone else could take that weight now. The shark let go and came again. The second bite took him to the place where measure fails. His blood made a wide pink confusion in the chop. Hands tried, failed, found purchase on a strap that wasn't connected to a man anymore. Ronnie sobbed a single syllable, "Dan," as if named would mean owned, would mean kept. Harper's last sensation was not pain. It was the coolness of water on the inside of his mouth, a sweetness that had no salt. He chased the flavor like he'd chase rain off a porch rail. Then no chase. Then nothing. The destroyer escort bored in, engines a hammer. Lines fell like answers. Men screamed and were pulled and coughed and made the world again, one breath at a time. The ocean rolled its wide shoulder. The sharks went about their business. The Catalina idled, overburdened with the saved. Pilot jaw set in a line that would ache for weeks. August 2nd to 3rd, 1945, night into morning. After dark, the first ship on scene did something doctrine would hate, and humanity would remember. She trained her searchlights into the sky, a pillar of white that said, "We are here to anyone still able to read." That beam reached men, and men reached back with the last strength in wrists and voices. Through the night, more ships arrived, other destroyer escorts, a high-speed transport, decks becoming operating rooms, hospital wards, quiet rooms for yelling. Sailors with whole skin made room for sailors barely wearing theirs. Coffee that tasted like burned heaven found cracked mouths. Morphine bent time. Names were collected with the care you give to ashes. At dawn, a small sea grew between what had been and what now was. The ocean was calmer. The sharks were there because they are everywhere, but the arithmetic had changed. More steel, more hands, more purposeful noise. Rescue boats still combed oil-slicked lanes for voices and motion. Each find was a fragile astonishment. Some counts hardened to legend because they're too large to hold in a single human. Nearly 1,200 aboard. About 300 went down with the ship. Only 316 alive when the last tally was done. Between those numbers live all the small private arithmetics, who let go and who held on and who was eaten whole and who came apart in ways you cannot put in a ledger without lying. In a corner of a crowded sick bay, someone asked about Tex, the one who held the star, the one who was Daniel to a boy named Ronnie, the one whose full name would ink itself on a casualty list sent inland like a telegram with its heart pulled out. The answer was the look men give when the ocean has had its due and there are no more nouns to spare. News traveled differently then. It took roads and ships and hands. Within a week, families sat on porches or under ceiling fans, letters creaking open like doors, learning that a son or brother had lived through torpedoes and water and sun and then been taken by a mouth older than engines. The sea is not a character in a story. It is a medium through which characters stop being. Mothers grieved with a specificity that never makes it into history texts. Fathers found chores that needed doing and did them wrong 3 times so they could do them again. On airstrips and decks, men spoke softly of sharks the way you speak of a weather that has personality. Some swore they'd felt a hand between their shoulder blades in the water, something that sent them back to the circle right before the big fish passed through. Others said they'd make their lives as far from salt as a man can manage. A few went back to ships because after a thing like that, you sometimes marry the cause of your fear. They would stand on steel at dawns for years and watch horizons and feel their hearts ease in ways they couldn't earn any other way. In offices later, there were inquiries and courts and words that wore suits. A captain who had done his job and more stood in a room with men who had not been in the water and defended decisions made in a clock's single breath. Years after, the country would move a finger on its own scales and say, "We judged too hard, too fast. We needed a man to carry the weight of an ocean, and that wasn't fair." The paper shifted in ways paper does. It did not bring back a single breath. For the boys who lived, the ocean never entirely left their bodies. They would wake at 2 a.m., bone cold in August, tasting diesel. They would avoid butcher shops. They would surreptitiously touch their wrists in crowded rooms, feeling for a pair of loops of line that were not there anymore. Some would take grandchildren to aquariums with tanks so clean they felt obscene. And when a shark slid by on the other side of the glass, it would be, just for a beat, too close, too present, too familiar a geometry. Then a small hand would be in theirs, and a voice would say, "See his teeth?" And they'd say, "I see 'em," and keep breathing. The official histories will tell you about tonnage and timing, and the names of planes. The Ventura, whose pilot's eye snagged an oil shine and changed a story. The Catalina, whose pilot laid a bet against sea states and won enough men back to call it profit. They will list the ships that bent toward the flares, the numbers that fit on one page and don't. They will mention sometimes that the sharks took many and put a range to it and leave it at that because commas are easier than teeth. Our man, call him Daniel if you need a door through which to walk into this, lived as far as a man can live on will alone. He kept fists for snouts. He kept breath for a math that insisted on another minute. He held a star in the sky because a friend told him it was his job. When an animal wrote a final line through his middle, he gave back to the ocean what the ocean had never promised not to take. His last thought was not a number. It was a kitchen and a Sunday and a biscuit, which is to say it was home, which is to say it was the opposite of teeth. August 3rd, 1945, afternoon. On a destroyer escort's deck, a petty officer dipped a paintbrush in a coffee can and wrote names on a chalkboard that sweated under the Pacific glare. Men shuffled forward and said, "Here?" And the petty officer dotted a column and said, "Good." Sit later, he would kneel by an empty bunk, the one they'd made up anyway out of habit and hope, and he'd rest both palms on the pillow like a man blessing a child he'd never meet. Outside, flying fish threw themselves into air for no reason we can ask. Behind the stern, a long, slow wake scrolled past and closed without comment. The ocean is very good at that, closing without comment. That night, far across the map, a city would burn under a single bomb. The world would change its slope. The ocean would go on being exactly itself. The boys who had lived would lay their heads down and not sleep. The boys who hadn't would go on being the size of a word spoken at kitchen tables with the radio low. The sharks would turn slow circles where no one watched and write their patience across a field of light the moon laid out just for them. If you need someone to remember, remember this. The ship sank. The man survived a night and a day and another. He did not drink the sea. He made a job out of holding up a star. Rescue came. And then the biggest, oldest fact in that part of the world rose like a dial being turned to on and did what it has always done when meat is offered in water too wide for law. His name joined a list. His story joined a larger story. The ocean wrote a closing line and moved on. We are the ones who refuse to. We are the ones who keep the star aloft for a while longer, even if it's only with a memory and a fist we can still close.